Imagine you're in your late 50s and you lose your hearing. You have lost one of your core senses, and now you either have to get an implant, you have to learn how to lip read, facial expressions. I mean, you have to essentially relearn how to live life, let alone figure out how to balance since you don't have hearing anymore. I have a guest here today who not only dealt with this great challenge late in life, but also came out on the other side with flying colors. Check out this episode of Digitales with Sardar Nadir Akmal Khan Lagari, who's going to talk to us about how you get through the most difficult times in your life through faith and resilience. Sardar Nadir Akmal Khan Lagari, how are you today?
Walaikum salam. All well. And first of all, thank you for having me over. Normally, I would just say simply thank you.
No, I appreciate you taking the time. I'd taken a pause and I wasn't sure who I'd bring on after my 2-month pause of the live discussions. And you have someone very persistent who's on your side, who brought your story forward. And something about it really resonated with me because you have lost your hearing. You are completely deaf. And this happened to you late in life in 2019. In fact, as we're doing this interview, for those who can't see, you are partly listening to me and partly looking at a device that is capturing all my words, which is why I'm speaking slower than I normally do. And just that experience for me is interesting because you then went on to run an election and fight and contest an election that you won. So I want to break this conversation up into a couple of parts. First of all, how did you lose your hearing this late in life? And how do you recover from something so life-changing? What kind of conviction do you need?
Faizan, first of all, let me clarify the part that why am I looking here? Because after my implant operation, I have to have certain things which should be consistent. For instance, I'm going to hear you. I'm going to lip read you because whatever I'm hearing for confirmation, I want to lip read. And once I do that and I know the direction of the conversation, then I'm absolutely normal. Now, the doctor actually told me, and I'm being very candid here, my audiologist, he told me that do not use the computer for backup transcription. Don't use it. Because your brain, not mine, any human being's brain is so smart. They will always try to find the shortcut and get you to the right direction. But the fallback situation is that once you don't have the luxury of carrying these gadgets, then, you feel a little lost. So I have overcome all these problems. This I've just kept as a backup to give myself a little bit of confidence. Coming back to your first part, which is the most important part. Actually, I was hit with meningitis, and if you believe me, I had neck pain. Well, I used to play squash and very serious level squash, and I used to play cricket, played for Karachi Gymkhana. I was into sports all my life. So I went to the doctor. The doctor said that, sir, no issue, just take some painkillers and you'll be fine. This is 2019, and ninth rosa, and boom, in the morning, I had the pain, severe pain in my neck, and I just conked off. Then I don't know what happened. By the time I recovered, it was the end of the month, whatever. So then I was told that he had meningitis attack. So, we don't have that kind of medical facilities that we can actually uh, preempt such situation. For example, for meningitis, there are anti-meningitis vaccines available which cost nothing more than 400 rupees.
Wow.
Every child should be given that medicine. Every person living in Pakistan should be given that vaccine so that he's covered for meningitis. So even if you're hit with meningitis, this won't happen and it won't get serious.
So you had never received a meningitis vaccine?
I didn't even know. Only time we knew and we thought, again, knowledge, didn't know. When I went for my Hajj or Umrah, they always give you these shots. And 90% of the time in those days, people used to just get the certificates. So, you never took it that seriously.
So what is meningitis? For those who don't know.
Meningitis is something that, it goes through the system and it goes into your brain and it disrupts everything. It's like a grenade that explodes in the brain. There are two types of meningitis. One is the one I got, which is, it's different. And then there's another one, I forgot the name, Galeria or something, I don't remember the name. That is the one which eats the brain. I didn't have that. I had the first one, which 90% of the people get. Now, here's a very interesting story. So I was saying the two most beautiful people in my life, my wife and my daughter. My son is like me, happy-go-lucky, he will, all over the place. But my wife was, the way she handled it, don't even remember. And she was consistent. And just to give you an example, not an example, a real story. The doctors came and told my wife and at Aga Khan that we suspect that he has that other form of meningitis. So can we get a MRI done? She said, do that. So they took me for an MRI, and then the doctors were of the opinion that he has that one. So then the doctors suggested that, look, 90% survival is not going to survive, 10% chance. So what you do is there's a medicine that we will give. It's a shot in the dark. He can survive or he'll go. As it is, he's going, so it's worth taking the risk. So my wife said, okay, do that. They prepared me that tomorrow morning, in the morning, they will do this. So night, whatever happened, she's very strong in her faith. She went in the morning and told the doctors, I want another MRI done before I give him the medicine. They said, madam, you've already had the MRI done last night, so I don't think this will. She said, don't worry, I want to get it done. So they take me again, and once they took me and the result came, they became 100% certain that it's the normal viral meningitis. So I was spared from being given those tablets. So, that was one battle she won with the blessings of Allah. And then slowly I recovered, and my daughter and wife, they helped me. Then they took me to London, and when I actually woke up from my coma, whatever, I was on a ventilator. So when I woke up, I couldn't sit, because if I sit, I fell on this side, or on the left side, because once you lose your hearing, your balance goes. So it was a painful experience. For me, it was a very scary, feeling that all of a sudden I've lost everything.
So let me pause you 1 second there. when was the first second you realized you've lost your hearing? Was it when you woke up 20 odd days later?
No, actually, when I woke up for the first 2 days, I could hear, those are coming back. And I used to ask my wife, are they playing these songs or what is wrong? So she didn't tell me. So then it faded. And in 2 to 3 days, completely silence.
So this happened real. You were watching yourself lose your hearing.
But you see, I was not told that you're going to be losing your hearing.
So what did you think was happening?
There was a chance that I might not.
Right. So there was hope.
Yeah, hope. Yeah. So
when did you come to terms with the fact that it's gone?
when I stopped hearing, and I told my wife I can't hear. So she said, "Yeah, okay, don't worry. We are taking you for a sound test," and it proved me right that there's nothing. So
And at that point, when they realized that there's nothing and you realized that the sound is gone, what was the first feeling you felt?
Faizan, I am on air and I am not going to take the route that, I am very holy and I am but I am going to say one thing, that I've always been very attached to my religion. And I knew that this is the time not to complain. Because the moment you start complaining, then you lost the battle. And at that time, I was also given hope that there is a way out. There's going to be an implant operation. This is a temporary thing and you'll come around it. But this thing, once you get it done, then do you realize that normal hearing and this hearing is a difference? For instance, if I'm sitting here and I hear many sounds, you're not. You and I having a conversation, you'll exclude all the sounds and you'll focus on me. I can't do that. I hear everything. So the point is, I never complain. I never said in my heart said, Allah, why me?
Not even for a second, because that's the first reaction.
Not even for the second in 2 days. Now, can I ask you a question? Or rather, I'm asked myself a question. Still, right now, if Allah Ta'ala tells me, okay, now that I'm going to restore your hearing, but you won't be able to see. So I'm going to say, no, thank you, Allah. This is good. I want to see. I want to, hearing is no issue. Allah says, I'll restore your eyes, your hearing, but you won't be able to walk. He says, no, thank you, Allah. You've been very kind to me. Only this has happened. I'm okay with it. So my point is, whatever the situation, no matter how bad, no matter how deep, no matter how hurtful, no matter how frustrating, no matter what, you need to understand that you've come in this for a test. And Allah takes you through these tests. And if you come out not complaining, He will be happy. And if you come out complaining, then as it is, you lost the battle. So the bottom line, never lose faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Always be thankful, always appreciate what He has given you. Our mentality is, we always look upward, we never look downward. We are always saying that, that guy has a better house, that guy has a better car, he has a better whatever. But you never look down as to what's happening. So I think contentment, basic link with the religion, and your faith. This you have to, continue. So before I forget, I want to continue on then on the journey. So then they took me to London, one of the most painful journeys I had, because there was infection in my, because of meningitis, in my spinal cord also, so I couldn't sit. Any movement would give me tremendous pain.
Sorry, I want to interrupt before. When you lost your hearing, at that same time, you lost your sense of balance?
The moment you lose your hearing, your balance is gone.
So if you're being transported or moving from here to London on a wheel, so you were now wheelchair bound because you couldn't stand.
Faizan, I mean, I'm being honest with you. I couldn't even use the, bicep. What do you call them? I couldn't even use them, but I couldn't stand.
So you lost your hearing and you lost your ability to stand at the same time.
I mean, I was just flat on the bed or on the wheelchair.
And now you're being shipped to London in the process.
Yes. And then we go to London. The most painful journey was the flight from here to London, because, going to the bathroom or toilet or movements, jumps and all of that would give me a lot of pain. But I was lucky, my wife and daughter were with me, and Dr. Menaz, my, doctor, she was there with her husband. So they all, were there too, sort of. So we land up in London, and we take an appointment with the doctor, and the doctor checks my hearing, and he says both ears are good for transfer implant. So we get that done. And then it was a slow process of, like for instance, a speech therapist would come and she would start with vowels, E, or we go back to kindergarten.
So let me ask, wait, this part I'm confused. When you get your hearing back, why do you need speech therapy? Does your ability to speak get affected as well?
Because it's not the speech that gets affected. It's the listening ability that gets affected. Because what you're hearing is something, I mean, that's common knowledge. It's sound wave. How do you hear me? It's a
Sound wave.
So that sound wave was not making any sense to me. So they had to teach me, say, water, or what, so the sound that comes out. So it had to be started from point one, which is what they do in childhood. So it had to be started.
Okay, wait. I didn't realize this. You're telling me essentially your brain completely reset the sounds of vowels, words, everything.
No, let me.
I just want to understand what happens in that regain when you get the implant and you can hear again. It's not the same as hearing from before.
I'll explain it to you. First of all, it's not your ability to speak that goes bad. You're absolutely fine. You can speak. You can do whatever you want. It's your ability to hear or to lip read, which the brain uses the old files, and it just doesn't let you believe that this is, this is what is being said. You believe it's something else that is being said. So, in that process, so once they turn this off, initially it's like Mr. Spock, in that digital tone. And it is so loud, it's like 1,000 watt here and 1,000 watt this side. So, you actually throw up with so much sound. So, but a person like me who was old, or, fairly on that line, is a different ball game. For children that are born and naturally they're deaf, and if they put implants and they have this machine on, they'll be very normal in like, no, I mean, they will be speaking, they will understand, they will recognize everything. So it's the older person who has lived his life hearing, with hearing, normal hearing. For him, it's more difficult. But it becomes better. But then you see, I had to fight two ends. I had to fight my, walking ability, my balance ability, my speech. So I worked on that. And, my daughter would take me to Hyde Park and, those pedal boats, and she would do it, and I would sit with her and, say, oh my God, when will I? And I'm a golfer also, by the way. So we have this beautiful group called the Legends. We used to travel all over the world. I have very good friends there. So, I lost everything. But now I'm back on. I play golf. I brought my handicap down. I'm playing good golf. I play everything. In fact, right now I'm dressed to go, apart from this, to go and play golf. So I restored that and I became normal. End of the day, my last point on this topic, Faizan, just pure, simple blessings of Allah, and blessings of Allah through my family, my two kids, and my wife, and people who were generally aligned with me, my friends, my, everyone. Ma, for instance, she's sitting here, or, so many people. Nobody discouraged me. In fact, every person encouraged me. And I remember first time when before going to London, Dr. Arif Alvi, I received a call because I was in Tehreek-e-Insaf as well. So he calls me, my wife, and I want to come and see him. So he came, so I had a pad, he would write, I would read, then I replied to him. So, it's something that over period, but I'm happy, no complaints. God is kind.
There's two more questions on this I want to ask, and then I'll move on. How long did it take for you to get your sense of hearing close enough to what it was originally? And how long did it take for you to restore your balance?
It honestly depends on how much damage is done. Mine was quite extensive, so it took me a little longer. But I was lucky when they put after the implant operation, they turned it on, so I could hear voices. So I said, oh. Then they told me very clearly that now it depends. You'll have to get used to it. You will have to have speech therapies so that you can understand a person, what is being said. So it took me, it's a now, and it's like an ongoing process. I keep storing sounds in my system, and I keep getting better and better. And, I think, I think I would also send a message from my side to the people. You have to be positive. If if you give up and you let adversity take over, then you're done. So you need to be positive. You need to look at the bigger picture, and then let fate decide. Not fate. Let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decide for you. And, he says that wherever I test you with, you will be rewarded in the next world. So, inshallah.
So it's an ongoing process for the sound. But for the balance, how long do you think it took before you were able to sort of play sport or play golf?
It took me 3 years.
3 years for balance. Okay. So in that 3-year process.
Because I'm saying 3 years to be fully restored.
And in that 3 years, when could you walk comfortably or run or jog or?
No, I couldn't.
You couldn't?
I couldn't. You started from, those crutches. and from wheelchair to crutches to walking, holding hand of my daughter or wife or my son over, and then going and sort of recovering every day. But I enjoyed it. Why? Because the first time I said my namaz standing up, I felt so good that Allah has given me this opportunity. First time I went out, it was like, oh boy, I've done this. So it's like when I'm a pilot also. So when you first get a solo flight, you say, oh my God, I can actually fly this machine. So it's that encouragement that the system generates for you. And then you become happy. But it takes a little time to get better, and it takes a lot of strength, divine strength. I'm not saying you strength in the sense that you need to be a believer, so then you'll be okay.
So in that 3-year period,
I hope I haven't depressed you too much.
no. It's almost as if somehow you were placed in front of me to tell me exactly what I need to hear. It's funny how the universe works sometimes. But in that 3-year period when you were, let's say, getting your balance back, or you were getting your sound back, right? It's human nature that you, as positive as you try to stay and as much faith as you have, you will hit peaks and valleys of emotion, right? How do you get through the most negative period of that time, when even with faith and even with the surrender, knowing that it will work out, you go through the lulls of emotion and the sadness and the experience of loss, right? How do you get yourself out of that bottom?
I would say that there have been many times when I would be frustrated when, a person is talking to me and I am not being able to listen to him. Because then it gets very frustrating, and then normally people are not that understanding, and they come and shout in your ear, and you have to push them back and tell them, Bhai, why are you shouting in the air? There's nothing here for me to hear. Oh no, I will speak in your. So I said, no, I have to lip read you and understand you. You can do it from across the wall also, and I'll hear you. But the point is that, so I used to get frustrated and be aggressive at times and be a little emotional. But I always found peace in my religion. I thought namaz is the key, and if you do that, and we are lucky, we keep going to Saudi Arabia for Hajj, for Umrahs. We've done many Umrahs, done 3 Hajj. All our children have done Hajj and Umrahs, and we go every year. So whenever there was a depressing situation, I would always find peace in calling out to Allah. And then, of course, a positive wife. What a woman. Lighter side, if you ask men, they says, if I was given a choice and Allah said, will you marry her? So I'd say, no, Allah, thank you, I'll marry somebody else. I'll marry 1,000 times, because she is the one who held the ground. She was the one who was making everything happen. So I think an educated lady in the house not just educated, but a woman who has, a big heart. She has something to offer in terms of, in totality. That's what makes the difference. I think that's where Pakistanis, that we can touch that subject later. That is where Pakistanis and maybe, this part of the world, we are lagging behind because we don't give the women or the female gender the kind of respect they deserve. So, and it is, by the way, in our religion, I mean, when our Prophet, Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he led a life, first his wife, then his daughter. I mean, he was, his sunnat, once you follow it. I mean, that's the whole thing. We can talk about that later. So I think there are still times that you get depressed, but there's so many good things that have happened after this that, the good prevail over the bad.
And if someone has a family member that they're close to, or a spouse that is going through what you went through, what would be the message you would give them? Because this experience is not on them, but they have to deal with this experience for the rest of their life, or support the family member or the spouse. So what is the advice you would give them as they are the supportive partner?
You mean in general?
In general.
I think a relationship of a man and wife, husband and wife, I think it's not a one-way street. It's a two-way street. You need to be, if your spouse or your wife or your husband, vice versa, you need to stand with each other in adversity and in happiness. And you need to have that kind of what you call a belief that, if I do wrong with her, then I also have a daughter. And, she's also someone's daughter that you brought in. So you need to have that respect. So I think, but you see, this is not taught in schools, colleges, or universities. This comes from the family unit system, the way that they treat the ladies, and both ways. So I think it's there is no person superior and there's no person inferior. I think in a normal household, any person you ask, even if he's very successful, the role of the wife has been, in his life, has been, tremendous. It's only that that person has to look deeply and see what actually happened. My case, so she's led. She's carried on. So, she's the one who's doing everything. And, when I got married, she was from an educated family from Karachi, I being from the rural areas. But then it was something so beautiful that every step of the way, she actually wanted me to excel. And she never had this feeling of, but it was always giving in and trying to, how do I say that, encourage the person in every step of the way. So I think my general advice to people would be, read Islam properly. read the rights of the female, read the rights of a male. Everything has been written. A wife brought in is not your slave. A wife has equal rights, if not more. So you need to look into that. You need to understand, and you need to understand one thing, that end of the day, you will be held accountable in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because I can deceive you, Fazan. You might think I'm such a great man. Maybe I'm not. It's only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. So end of the day of the judgment, we'll all be held accountable. So if we are held accountable, I know I've done many wrongs. So I've always asked for forgiveness even for my wife. So, and always, even in Makkah, everywhere, I said, well, look, I've done too many wrongs. I mean, when I remember once we were going to our village and we were to get down in Sakhar, and I told her, you have to have the parda, my people, all of that. She, poor woman, she fell down. I said, oh God, you've embarrassed me more, instead of holding her and, sort of, from that day. And now is the day when, mashallah, she runs her own business in Sakhar. She's done tremendously well. She looks after the family. She looks after me. Great.
After all this, you decided to run for election? It was after this experience, after the recovery, because you ran for election as well, and then you won election, and you're the only sitting sitting MPA.
Yes.
Who is hearing impaired, who was voted independently.
Okay. I think it's a very important question that you've raised. Fizan, I'll be open, candid, and I'll be as open as possible. I was an MPA before, I was a minister before in General Musharraf's time, and we worked very hard, diligently, and we did whatever was possible in those days. Then because my wife's family had American nationalities, so my wife was given the opportunity of a green card, and then they also sort of got me in, and she got me an American passport. So after 2008, I just did not contest, because I thought, I have a American passport and I don't want to give it up, because it's so hassle-free. Travel is easy, and it's the most powerful passport. But we never moved to America. We always stayed in Pakistan. Now, when I fell ill, there's so many people coming and praying for me, that even Aga Khan Hospital was saying, they were praying, Allah, this man should recover, so that, this hospital gets free of this, so many people coming. So once that happened, and I've always dealt with people with humility, not as a big sardar and a cruel man, as a perpetual gun in his hand. No, not at all. I was the fatherly figure. I always helped people in whatever way I could. So there were so many people, prayers. Then when I got better, again it was my wife. She said, look, you have survived. You don't even know how you've survived. I know how you've survived and what Allah has done for you. So how can you enjoy the stay? I mean, you have one option. You can stay back, travel all over the world, play golf, enjoy yourself, and pass away. The other choice is give up your passport, go back to the people, do whatever is possible. And to the last day, believe me, we had fights on this. Yeah, I don't want to give it up. Now, let me just give you an example, Fazan. That's how Allah Ta'ala creates opportunities. My scrutiny of papers was on the 24th of January, I think, if I recall. On the 19th of Jan, I write to the American embassy that I want to give up my passport. And they said, oh, you want to give it up? Why? So I said, I want to contest the election. So they said, okay, we'll do it. Then Alina, my daughter, was with me. And I asked him, they saw that he can't, but you can't here, so how will you contest? I said, I'll take my chances. I'll do whatever is possible. So, but I asked them that, can you help me? Can you give me the, the certificate of renunciation so I can submit it? And they said, sorry, sir, we can't tell you anything. So by any way, it's a double jeopardy. No, so we can't, but there have been instances where we've been able to give the certificate in 24 hours, but we can't promise you that. So I said, okay, I'll still do it. I took the oath, gave up my passport. And as luck would have it, I was waiting 20th, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I get an email that, sir, your renunciation certificate is ready. Please come and pick it up. Now you're no more an American citizen, so use the Pakistani window. So I said, okay. So I said, okay. Now I take that certificate. I mean, can you imagine the frustrations I've gone through? I take that paper, I submit my papers, the RO, which is the person who accepts the paper. Oh, my opponent tells them that this is bogus. It's not an original one. I said, am I going to, there's a seal of the American consulate, there's everything. So he does not reject my papers, but he says, I'm giving you 2 days. You go back to your American consulate here and you get us an email. I said, they've given a certificate, you want me to go back? They said, no, you have to do that. So I come back to Karachi. I go back to American embassy. Such good people. I mean, those very people who have given up their nationality. They were they had empathy there. The person meets me immediately and says, sir, where do you want the emails and everything? So I said, now you send it to each and every person in this Pakistan so that, I get my papers accepted. They send that to the Interior Minister, Interior Secretary, you name it, and to the RO, and to the Election Commission, and to everyone. And I go there and got accepted. So it was primarily to come in, fight till the end of my life, do whatever I can. It makes a big difference if you're not into corrupt practices, if you're not into wrong things, if you do not side people just for votes, and if you do not do the kind of things that are normally associated with politicians, then you're doing something to take some brownie points up for the next world. So that's the idea, and that's what I was pushed into. But on a quieter side or on a lighter side, whenever I get frustrated, I fight with my wife. You got me doing this. And basically, it was a very good decision I took, very satisfying. And if I had a hat, I would take it off and say, hats off to my constituents who did not think this to be a liability. They knew that I would come up and do whatever I can, and I fought as an independent. So, I was lucky. I had the support of the people. I had the support of two of my very dear friend brother, like Sardar Ali Gaur Khan Mar, Sardar Khalid Ahmed Khan Lund. We were all together. We got this going, and Alhamdulillah, won my election with a big margin.
So you were talking about how you were on a first name basis with Imran Khan and you would give him the rundown as it was.
I gave you a rundown on that. I think we were basically talking about, my experience with the three parties. So I was saying that with Imran Khan, I was on a one-to-one basis. I was his president for PTI in Sindh, and on first name basis. I never, I would always tell him what was, in my opinion, was the right. Maybe I could be wrong, but whatever I had here, I would shoot it out. And he would listen, he would do everything. Then, of course, I don't want to, sort of go into why I left PTI or why, because I'm not going to talk any negative thing once you have been in a party. It doesn't look nice or even sound nice to speak something, against the party. I had a good stay there. Somehow we were not destined to be together. I left quietly. I left without any issues, nothing whatsoever. And you've never seen me talk bad about anyone. So I'm good with that. I don't. When I was leaving PTI, I had at that point joined Pakistan People's Party because I'll be very honest with you. When we were growing up, we were school going, Shahid Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was, it was a person we all looked up and said, wow. He was the one who actually empowered the people. He was the one who was instrumental in breaking the chains of slavery. He was the one who actually, told the bureaucracy or the civil services that you people are here to serve, not to be hakim or, rulers. So, those days, and then, of course, not to forget the initiative he took in terms of nuclear empowerment, that whole thing. If he hadn't started that, if he hadn't done that, today we would have been in a different situation. So I think Zulfikar Ali Bhutto Sahab, or Shahid Zulfikar Ali Bhutto Sahab, hats off, and what he's done will always remain till end of times. People will remember him. So I joined People's Party at that point of time, and then I was became sick, and I left interest. And by the time, but I pause here for 5 minutes. My stay with PML, even to this point of time, Fizan, nobody knows that PMLQ was not the party. It was PML. Because all parties, National Alliance, PMLQ, Jatoi Saab's party, there's so many parties. They all came in and that became the PML. So I think in those days, we did what was required of us, and we did try to, in my period, I was an irrigation minister. Sakkar Barrage, there was an issue, there was a hole in one of the gates, which had to be repaired, so we did well with that. Eventually, what I say is that when I was contesting, So People's Party already had their own candidate. So I had made up my mind. I was not stopping. So like I told you previously that a little while back, that I gave up my passport, everything. So why would I step back? So I did contest as an independent. And then later on, I was, as it is, like I said, initially joined People's Party. So they are, once again, I went and joined them for one reason alone. My affiliation, that keeping aside, why would I want my constituents to suffer? Why can't we have, why would I take them to the opposition or by somewhere else? So I was of the view that whatever God has, whatever little time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me, let me work out, let me do some development work, and whatever I can do, and be a hope for many. So based on that, I joined, and I am trying my utmost best to help out my people. And you see, in Pakistan, Faizan, there is an issue, and I'm being very candid. The system itself is not geared up. What I'm trying to say that, things get better if you have the local government system working properly. Now, if you don't have the local government system properly, then we get confused with the role of the MPA and the MNA. The role of the MPA and MNA is to enact laws, to set the quality, the standard, and the future with kind of laws that protect ordinary people, civil rights, rule of law. Your job is not to get someone transferred or posted. Your job is not to come in and ask for, ridiculous things. Your job is but please see across the 4 assemblies, provincial assembly, do you see any MPA, especially the treasury benches MPA, coming in and coming up with laws that protect the ordinary people, that protect the system, that protects or not protect, that encourages rule of law? So I think that's where things need to move. The first step for any political player is not the political party. That is a later stage. First is it's the universities and colleges, the student unions. Those are the ones, those are breeding grounds for, upcoming political people. Then they enter political parties, and then the whole system starts working. Now, may I ask you a question? Do you know who's going to be the next president of America? You will only come to know when their party decides, okay, we've gone through our process, through voting, through whatever, and the new president has been nominated for Democrats and for Republicans. Do you know who will be the new governor? No, because they have a system. Everyone is voted in, and then, the primary, the secondary, and they come up. That's collective thinking, collective system through which you actually come up and strengthen your system. How can a Pakistani be patriotic? I still say hats off to our Pakistanis who are still very patriotic. But I ask you a question. If an ordinary Pakistani, he cannot go to a police station without safarish, he cannot go to a government department without fleecing, palming their hand. If he has a problem, nobody comes to support him, and then we tell him, Pakistan Zindabad, and he says, Pakistan Zindabad. For God's sakes. smell the coffee, grow up. What are we doing with the youth? The youth is today, we have the most, the youngest population in the world. Youth is full of ideas. Youth is something that, they're beaming with energy. If you don't give them the opportunities, if you don't give them the strength, if you don't give them anything, they will 100% go into negativity. And a young man, you see, in our younger days, you pick up a fight with anyone. Now we say, bhai, bachcha ko jana do, cool down. So what I'm trying to say is that youth has to be taken care of with proper direction, and they need to be given opportunities. Their education level has to increase. Their vocational training has to increase. Why do we? I'm not complaining. I'm just saying it in a very simple, plain. I mean, I just want to say this simply and plainly. I'm grateful, the country is grateful that our Pakistani labor force, everyone working abroad, are sending money back to Pakistan, and that's one of our major contributors to our economy. People living in America, London, and all these European countries, they very few send money back. It's the labor force who are doing. Now, may I ask why? Why can't we provide them with the facilities and the opportunities that they start working in Pakistan? Why can't we have healthy competitions between all our cities? Why do we have to be enemies of each other? Why? Sorry, I'm a bit getting carried away, but I want to talk about Karachi. I mean, Karachi, I grew up in my birth city. I stayed here. I've lived here. How Karachi after the 80s was dying a slow death. Some will say, I'm a Mahajer. Oh, bhai, you've lived here. Your parents have lived here. You've been born here. You're a Mahajer. How you're a Mahajer? Because they were made to feel like that. Then some say we are Sindhis because they say they're usurping. They see both sides have. There are many issues in this whole thing. Karachi is the economic engine. Karachi is the place where technology survives. Karachi is the seaport. Karachi has the business community, which is, it's robust. It's full of energy. So why shouldn't Karachi come up? Well, I'm not saying that, Islamabad, Lahore, and any other city, they should also come up. But I think our mayor, he's doing a very good job as of right now, since he's come in. But with all due respect, I still feel we need to do much more. We need to get this city going on three fronts: development, image. You need to get the infrastructure, lastly, rule of law. So, federal government, all these, everyone should come together and they should put their resources in to get Karachi to a point. Karachi is the business capital in all terms of Pakistan, and then Karachi is the integral part of Sindh. It's the capital city of Sindh. We need to protect that. We need to develop Karachi in a proper way with long-term, medium, and short-term plans. And these plans, Faizan, I'm no Einstein. Okay, I'm just speaking out of I would say experience. We need to develop these plans through proper, people who have the necessary skills to understand what a mega city should be like, where all the development needs to take place, where are the how it's going to done first phase, second phase, third phase, fourth phase. And similarly, Pakistan also needs to identify other capitals of their provinces to develop those as well. Quetta, Lahore, Peshawar, everywhere. But to top all these cities combined together, Karachi is the heart.
So let me ask you this. You talked a lot about being inspired by Bhutto and his People's Party. And if I just do simple math, Bhutto's People's Party ran under Bhutto for, let's say, about 10 years. After he was foreign minister, he created the party. The party was intellectuals. Then he came into power until he was unfortunately, until he passed away the way he did. Right? So 10, 11 years is what that time frame would be roughly. 12 years. The People's Party of today has been in power for 18 years from the day that it took power in 2008. So essentially, this People's Party is actually the dominant People's Party. This mindset is the dominant mindset because they've been around far longer than the Bhutto's People's Party was. So my question to you is all of the things that you've mentioned, development, city, rural innovation, vocational training, all of these things that you've mentioned, here is a party that has been in charge for over 18 years. Do you think that this People's Party is better, equal to, or worse than Bhutto's People's Party? Because all of the things you listed are missing and they've been here for 18 years, longer than Bhutto was ever around.
You've put me on the spot. I have no breaks, unfortunately. Look,
I want to say something. Some time ago, Nadir Maksi came here and we were talking about something and he said something that has stuck with me. When you said no brakes, right? So in racing, I've gone Jeep rallying with him.
That's the Baloch DNA.
It's a Baloch DNA, right? So I've been to Jhal Maksi. In fact, there's my Jhal Maksi. I came second in my category. So he said, when in doubt, go all out. And that, he said, is the rule for rallying. When you see something and you're not sure what it is, just put the throttle all the way down and just hold on for dear life. So it's okay if you have no brakes.
Okay. But the point is, I don't have a V8 engine anymore. It's a V4 with no gas in it. So in any case, look, let me put it in a different perspective for you, but I'll answer it very candidly. First of all, I want to ask you a question and straight, like you asked me. The party created by the Muslims, Pakistan Muslim League, led by a person who under so much pressure survived and gave us this country, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Can you relate the party to that PML and today PML of yesteryears? So my friend, Pakistan in all respects, we have been not going this way, we've been coming down. So because there have been so many things, for instance, martial laws were imposed. For instance, Liaquat Ali Khan, a man who gave everything in his life, was assassinated. For instance, I mean, there have been so many times that we've been put on the spot for what? If democracy had prevailed, the standards would have been better. Merit system would have been in this the name of the game, and things would have been in a much better position. So, I'm not saying People's Party has, it done well in this, especially in terms of, because again, it was from the 80s. Again, I don't want to get into, the nitty gritty and say those people are involved in the, but the fact of the matter is that since the 80s, there was no ownership for Karachi. Ownership went to some other party, and we unfortunately inherited the Kalashnikov culture, and what all was happened, we all saw it.
Was the mayor today?
No, give me okay. Now, 2008. I think People's Party was also had to realize, and somebody had to go and tell them that, look, things are this way. I think the arrival or introduction of the chairman, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, I think because of his young blood and, educated profile, son of Shaheed Mohtarama Benazir Bhutto, Nawasa of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, I think they came in and they started to make the changes. But I'm again saying we have to go much higher than this. So I'm saying they introduced a new mayor in Karachi. Now, Wahab Saab is doing a good job, but my point is, it has to, we need to have that kind of positivity in the city through which we can actually say that Karachi is now on the road of success. We need to have that message come in. Now, that message cannot come in with slogans. If you say the same, if you give slogans, "Kya Pakistan ye kar lega," there's a time for practical steps, and we need to get it. And I think there's a realization in People's Party, and they're going to turn around before the next election. They would have done enough to get the votes they may deserve, not, that they may not deserve. So I'm 100% sure they will work out. But as of right now, the realization is there's a plan, and I'm sure I'm not the one privy to those plans because MPs come and sit in the assembly and go back, and that's about it. I mean, for us, I would like to meet the chairman and explain it to him and tell him that, this is what we are facing. Tomorrow, if Pakistan People's Party wants to be a party which holds majority seats in the whole of Pakistan, then the party today has to give its best through good governance, project itself, come up to a level, attract other provinces and people to come in and vote. Let me go back and Faizan tell you, you're young, you're not even born. Pakistan People's Party's major base was not Sindh. It was Punjab. Sindh came later. So Pakistan People's Party has a national, a sort of image that it's a national party. It is a national party. So I think it has to be done in a professional manner. It has to be, Karachi cannot be ignored anymore. Karachi has to come up, and I think realization or of such a the realization that what's the magnitude of this city. I think that's where the whole game ends. Once you realize the magnitude, okay, this is what we need to do in various fields, and then the federal government chips in with their resources and everyone gets together and we start moving in that direction. Look, I want to ask you one more question. Now, you've asked me many questions, Faizan. Household name in Punjab was PMLN. Was it or was it not? What happened once another party came in and competition arrived? PMLN couldn't hold on to any seats because then the new players were in. So it's the inertia, it's the natural process. So we have to stand up, smell the coffee, and get moving in that direction. Incompetence or, not knowing the situation and becoming jack of all trades is not what we need to do. If I'm a pilot and you ask me, you're a pilot, you're much more qualified. I'm putting you in on the train engine. You take the train from here to Lahore. I can't. So put the right people at the right place, equip the civil services. Every minister in the provincial and the federal government should be equipped with their team of experts, think tanks, which tell them that, look, this is not my personal jagir. This is my country. This is what we need to do. We need to have a system through which the real and the most important issues crop up, and then you project it and you go after it. So I think that's where what we need to do. I think the sooner the realization, the better the results. And Pakistan cannot wait. Now, one thing that I must say, Faizan, when one of the reason I didn't want to give up my passport, why I thought Pakistani passport, wherever you go, our visas get rejected. We are, thrown across the aisle. You go and sit there. With this Marka-e-Haq, with this Bunyanun Marsoos, with the armed forces, look at the way Pakistan has today got the respect of the world. Look at the way they've done. Look at the way federal government, look at the way Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, look at the way they projected our case. When we got together, it was a teamwork. The results are phenomenal. But these are short-lived. If the economic situation doesn't improve, if the opportunities don't come, if we just keep begging and we have these begging bowls all over the place, then any Pakistani would be going abroad. Today, thousands and thousands of people risk their life going to Europe through illegal means, and they get killed, in the boat and in boat accidents. I'm saying that the positivity now has to be, it has to be further pushed up by the politicians coming to actually help out in governance, by the civil service to come up and give results which are due, by the civil service to come up and help people. They shouldn't be always, sort of after a politician or someone say, get me posted. I think they should remain, they should be given whatever task they had. They should do their job. Politicians should do their job. Our defense industry has done so well. Aren't these the same Pakistanis? It's just that their discipline level is better. Aren't we going to? I'm being very candid, very emotional. For you and me to sit here in an independent, sovereign country, the price being paid by our Faujis, the shahadats, and by the thousands on, and without a blink of an eye. And that they're not craving, they're protecting the borders, the integrity of this country. So why shouldn't we why shouldn't everyone else come up and do it? We can't, maybe we don't get another Marka-e-Haq in our lifetime. So if the euphoria dies, if the whatever we've done to attain this, by the will of Allah, I think we should, everyone should, contribute now, make a pledge to take this country out of debts, make a pledge to make this a country for rule of law, make a pledge that we will abide by the laws, make a pledge we'll honestly pay our taxes, make a pledge we will do whatever is basically the rule of law says. Once we decide to do that, Faizan, we'll be a successful country. And I'm a firm believer one day, not in maybe my lifetime, one day this country will progress and will be a country to reckon with.
So I have one follow-up question, and I know we're running a little bit short on time, which is, for all of these things to happen, right? I'm going to connect 2 or 3 concepts here and come to my question. India went through land reforms, and through major land reforms. Pakistan always struggled with its land reforms, which gave space for the Sardars, the feudals, who eventually ended up in legislative positions, MPAs, MNAs, to enact laws. And the way the mindset is typically in the rural areas is that the Sardar has his own rule of law in their area, right? So how can there be a national rule of law and then a rule of law that is different for each Sardar and their area? And within that, there's a second question that comes up for me is, you talked a lot about sort of wanting to serve the people who supported you and wanting to have meaning for your life after this incident. And what I'm struggling with is this question around authenticity of feudalism. Can someone who's a feudal or a Sardar truly be the authentic version of themselves, because they have to be multiple different personalities at any given point in time, right? They carry sort of that training and that connection to the British that allowed them to have what they have today. They have to be a very different persona in front of their people to hold on to and retain the land. They have to constantly be competing with the Sardars of the area because someone might want to encroach on their land. They have to be a different person when they show up in the assemblies and they legislate. And then they are a different person, especially if they've grown up in one of the urban centers of the country, whether it's Lahore or it's Karachi. And they present very differently, right? So can a Sardar or a feudal truly be their authentic true self that is the person deep inside and not these various hats that they wear? And if that authentic self is truly the good self, would they ever give up what they have in terms of power and dominance for rule of law that applies to the rest of the country and not rule of law that is different for them, which is different for someone else? It's a lot to unpack, I know, but it's something that as I was listening to you, it kind of came together for me. And what I'm trying to answer is around the authenticity of the Sardar leader, because without them, most of Pakistan would be fairly fragmented because they do hold things together.
Okay, sir. 2 very important questions that you've asked. One about the land reforms and the other about the feudal mentality or the role of a Sardar and rule of law. Sardari system, actually, Sardar has become a name which is unfortunately tagged or perceived to be a person with a feudal mindset, a very destructive person, a very cruel person, a emotionless person. Unfortunately, that's not the case. First of all, this Sardari system was actually an introduction into this part primarily by the Baloch people. And Sardar was always it's a word they use, Sardar, but basically Sardar was the elder of the tribe. He was the fatherly figure. I mean, I can give you many examples in today's day and age where you have seen people who have been chief Sardars and yet humble, totally grounded. and educated, and nothing to do with the feudal mentality. For instance, Sardar Farooq Ahmad Khan Lighari, for instance, Sardar Mir Balak Sher Mazari, for instance, Sardar Sherbaz Khan Mazari, for instance, Sardar Zulfiqar Khan Khosa. I mean, these are all Tummans and Sardars which were big. For example, Maxi Sardars. For example, Sardar Khairbash Khan Mari, he took his people. People would not go with him unless he was a loved person and they exiled from Pakistan to Afghanistan. So the point is that a Sardar, if he has a feudal mentality, that mentality, it's just a mentality. Even a businessman, he can have a feudal mindset. Even a civil servant or any person with authority can have a feudal mindset that might is right, I'm right, you're wrong. A Sardar primarily comes in, he's the one who looks after his people, he's the one who gives up his own interest for the people. So that part I am trying to explain to you. Now comes the second part, which is part B of the same thing. What is stopping the country in this world, Pakistan, in the country, to enforce rule of law? Why would anybody go to people and ask for them to help out if they had the system in place? Now, for instance, this Karo-Kari thing, the court has taken cognizance and they are in it. And now even the Sardars, they don't indulge in this. They say, oh, matter is in the court. Because the system is geared up and they're coming in. So please don't blame feudal mentality and its negativity on the fact that it's because of the Sardar. If you let anyone, even if there's a help in your house, if you let him rule you, he will sit on the chair that you're sitting. So, there has to be a rule of law. So that's point number one. Point number two, we have to also look at the kind of perception and the image that is currently prevailing in this country. Sardar means loads of bodyguards with guns in their hands. Sardar means his word is final or you're shot dead. So and now, for instance, not from now, I'm saying it openly, this Karo-Kari, how is that an Islamic thing? Does Islam permit you to do this? A woman went to a prophet, Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and said, "Okay, I've done this." He said, "Please go right now. You're expecting." Then he said, "Go." I don't want to go further in that, but the point is that Islam does not permit you. So don't confuse culture and all of that with Islam. We are not here. I'm a Baloch, for instance, or a Sindhi, or a Punjabi, or whatever, Pathan, or Gilgati, but our kalma is one when we recite, says, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Is that different for the Sardar? No, it's the same. So the point is, we all are to be blamed for this. A Sardar has got nothing to do with this. If you let him get away with a murder, then he'll do more. So I think, for instance, my role with my people is of love and respect. I'm the fatherly figure. To date, and I give you with 100% assurance and guarantee, all my life, to this day and age, I have, God forbid, never ordered for a girl to be murdered or, for Karo-Kari, Ghairat and all of this. Nothing. Why should we? Who are we to do that? But once I raise this in 2004, they all ganged up every Sardar and said, this man has gone mad. Because I was going against the system and the culture. Or not the culture, the whole thing. So I did not go and follow that. I remained different because I had Islam in my mind and in my heart. So I am saying, sir, that is one thing that you need to understand and do. Now, sir, coming to land reforms, it's very easy. Let me ask you a question. Though I don't have land to that level that you say that for me, do land reforms, I don't care because I don't fall in that category. But let me ask you a counter question. What about the businessmen who have 13 factories or 12 mills and 100 things? Then tell them to also, there should be business reforms and they should give up there. It doesn't work like that. Your system should be in place. Land reforms have already taken place. The value of an acre as opposed to the yield and the money it gets, it doesn't match. The value is here and the yield, the income is here. Number one. Number two, sir, you need to enforce the system. How? Let us say if I have to claim that say I have 5,000 acres of land. Fine, sir. Best of luck. May it be, Allah Mubarak kare. Enjoy yourself. But sir, this is, say, whatever the rate per acre, this is the due that you have to pay back to the exchequer. We are giving you 3 years. Please pay your dues. Otherwise, sir, we will have to come in and, wake you up from the dream and confiscate the land. Why doesn't the government do that? Why don't they take thing? I would say for pesticides, for other things, for commodities, make it a fair, free market thing. You let market dictate. If the government has to give subsidy, you give it from yourself. Why on the shoulders of the agriculturist? So it is not a free market. You can't sell your price, your crop at a market price. It is fixed by the government. So everything has ups and downs. It's basically a concept developed in the urban areas, basically not knowing the real issue. So nobody's opposing land reforms. Nobody's opposing anything. What we are saying, whatever is due should be taken. And then it has to be, you have to reciprocate. If you want to confess anyone's land, then the similar thing should happen elsewhere. Elsewhere, you encourage them to make one factory after the other. Oh, wow, he's done wonderful because he's paying his taxes and he's doing that. So if he has more land, tell him to pay his taxes.
Valid point. Taxes is a whole other thing I don't want to get into because that's, I think, one area that every citizen has a responsibility to fulfill, which they don't. So I want to ask this question around how this country has come together, right? It was essentially the western border towards Afghanistan, the populace of the British Empire. Most of it was sort of in India. We had some concentration in Lahore, but Karachi, Balochistan, and the borders there were just essentially the backwater, right? In this backwater, you had various tribes that were living, and these tribes would move around. The tribes were connected, and this is all my understanding, connected by the language and their culture. And so when these tribes would move, let's say the Balochis would move and settle near the River Indus with the Sindhi-speaking tribes, they would always carry that Baloch identity. But then in 47, the borders of Pakistan were created, and somehow none of these various tribes that had moved with time assimilated into one national Pakistani identity. They still continue to retain the, oh, we are originally Baloch, oh, we are originally Sindhi, oh, we are originally Saraiki speaking, or we are Pakhtuns. And you are someone whose family has migrated from Balochistan into Sindh, settled into Daharki, and you are the Legharis. Why do you feel that that fragmented mindset continues to permeate and we don't have one national identity other than the one you described, which is we all recite the Kalma?
Well, a good question, and I would respond to that by saying that Baloch Confederation or Baloch people, basically what we hear, they migrated from Aleppo or, from that place into Iran, then to Balochistan. And Balochistan, there is a war between two cousins, Sardar Mir Chakar Khan and Rind, and we are basically originally Rind, and then Aliani, and then Legari. So similarly, there are many other tribes like that. And the other, Sardar Mir Chakar Khan had this war with Sardar Gohram Khan Lashari. And this, I'm not an expert, so whatever knowledge I have, I'm just saying. So this war continued for 30 years, and maybe 75,000 people got killed or shahadat. So, and then with the arrival of Humayun, when he was going back to get his throne from in India, so he asked Sardar Mir Chakar Khan to come with him as a help and go up to Delhi. And there many other people, Afghans, everyone, but Baloch also went. Once he became the Badshah, so they returned back. On returning, he settled in Sahiwal or Montgomery, I don't know what is it, some place, Sardargarh, something like that, in Punjab. He settled there, and then the rest came back. Like we originally originate from Barkhan, Loralai district, which is a place called Alagari Barakhan, just next to Khethrans. And then we have our tribe in Fort Monroe. The Balochi name for that is Nimru. So, the tribe lives there. And then there was a migration which further happened later. But how we came to Sindh, all of us, the Baloch, which includes Mazaris, Legaris, Khosas, Chandios, Chandios maybe were living here, but mainly all Baloch tribes, Lorns, Buzdars, all of them came when Talpurs, basically, who were part of the Confederation or the Baloch people, closely linked with Legaris. So they came and they took over Sindh. That is the main time that everyone started coming into, because he wanted their own, the people to come in. And they came and they were given lands and they stayed here and they intermingled. And hence, for instance, I speak Balochi, Sindhi, Saraiki, these three languages speak, and mostly Baloch speak these three languages. So, they all came. Now, my own background, from my maternal side, my Dada married Nawab Wali Muhammad Leghari, who was the first prime minister or wazir at that time. They called of the Talpur era. So he had two daughters. One got married to Nawab of Bahawalpur and one to my Dada, great Dada, grandfather. So there's a very interesting story into that also, which I will tell you some other time. But to cut the long story short, that period, they got married. Then my Dada Nawab Rahim Khan, he passed away. So there was a small migration at that time. And the lady married to the Nawab, my Gora, she helped my great grandmother, Bibi Ghulam Fatma. And then we moved to all over Sindh and especially this area and Rahimabad, where they all came and settled. So basically, Baloch people have been migrating all over Pakistan. You would be surprised to know that there are more Baloch in Dera Punjab, Dera Ghazi Khan, and Dera Rajanpur, and then Sindh, then in combined Balochistan, because major tribes are sitting in this side of the. Yeah, so that's one. I don't think you would even know that Dera Ghazi Khan and Dera Ismail Khan, they were of Baloch principalities. They were Ramdani Baloch. Both were brothers. Dera Ghazi Khan was uprooted by my family. They had a small fight. Baloch people, they always have problem with each other. They never go out and, so they uprooted them. So, this is a story. But here I must say that Sindh is a land which has always welcomed people. Sindh has welcomed the Urdu speaking community which came after migration or during migration. Karachi is absorbed, Pathans, Punjabis, every Pakistani that came, Karachi absorbed. Sindhi people did not differentiate or I would say they never went against the Baloch. They always thought Sindhi and Baloch are one and the same thing. Hence, many areas you would find Seraiki very common, Mirpur Khas, Ghotki, Dadu. You will find in Moro, there's so many, Ladakana, many areas. Apart from Balochi, Seraiki is a common language in this place. Thatta. So, there's so many areas. So, Sindh always opened its heart with open hands. I tell you, if I love any place, is the Sindh province, because this is something. I mean, it's a land of Sufis. It's a land of love. It's a land of respect. It's a land of, they always are willing to give. They don't take anything. They're always wanting to give. So my view is that the way Sindh treated Pakistan in general, I would say, may Allah be happy with that.
Thank you. I just want to summarize that. I just want to summarize that and say I have this. I only discovered Pakistan after I came back from the US. I lived in the US for 12 years. And then I came back when I was 30. Only after I came back when I was 30 did I spend the next 10 years discovering all of Pakistan, including remote areas like Rahmadabad in KPK, Karak, all of Balochistan, Turbat, Panjgur, Quetta, Karak in KPK, all of Punjab, all of Sindh. And I discovered, after exploring Pakistan over the last 10, 15 years, that Karachi, or even to some aspect Sindh, is Pakistan, but Pakistan is not Karachi or Sindh.
Well, I don't know how to answer that. I'd rather stay put just to
only sharing my
last point.
Yeah.
I always at times wonder, why am I so, people tell me I'm half mad. So I at times wonder, maybe I am mad. So, from my father's side, I have a Baloch DNA. And from my mother's side, I have a Pathan DNA. Now, these two joining together, man, it's lethal.
I want to thank you for the time. I want to thank you for sharing your experience, and I want to tell you how inspirational it was to hear about the transition from sort of normal life to living with an impairment and still having the fight in you to go and serve your people with the passion that you have. I wish you all the best on this journey, and I really hope that people were able to take away sort of the one key message that I got out of this is that this is all just a test. And there are times when we don't want to smile while giving the test, but we need to believe that at the end it will all be okay.
Yes, I agree with you, and I think we've spoken enough, and I bored you enough, and you played on my DNA by telling me to remove the foot from the brake, which I did. Yet the handbrake was in my hand, but still, I'm done more than what I could have said. I would want to say something, Fazan. It's people like you, the young people, who are doing so good. We need this. We need image building. We need people to speak of the rule of law. We need to have the time where Pakistan should excel. So I leave you with this prayer that you youngsters will improve the quality of messages, the quality of your programs, and you will not shy back saying, "Bada aadmi aa gaya, chup ho jao." So please don't do that. Do what is possible. If you are destined to grow, no person in this world will stop you. If you're not destined to go to a certain place, no person will ever be able to tell you or help you to get there. So, my friend, keep up your good spirits, keep your heart clean, and make sure that whoever your guest is, when he goes back, even he goes back and says, "Oh my God, that was an electricity volt, passed on to me." So I think that's what we need to do. And thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for tuning in to DigiTales. Like, subscribe, comment. We like getting your feedback, and we will share more content. Bye-bye.